Are you like me and love eating fish and wild game, but not quite at the highest level with your cooking craft? Maybe you've harvested a deer, but after cooking the backstrap, it didn't quite turn out like you wanted. And would you like to learn how to cook fish so it turns out perfectly every time you pull it off of the grill or off of the frying pan? You're in luck because today we have an award-winning outdoor chef and master of his craft. And today he's going to prepare us to create amazing meals. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. How's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest outdoor anglers, writers, and hunters than just about anyone out there. Hank Shaw, James Beard Award winner and master chef, is going to take us inside his award-winning books like Buck, Buck, Moose, and Hook, Line, and Supper. He's got a bunch of great ones. We're going to learn and discover how high heat is critical to preparing food and why you shouldn't be afraid of the high heat. We're going to find out how to cook over a fire properly, how to identify wild berries, and how to avoid your fish from sticking to the pan so it's perfect every time. Plus, we're going to even talk a little politics near the end as we find out how Hank transitioned from a political journalist and transfer this into his full-time gig as a hunter, fisherman, and gatherer. It's a good one today. Looking forward to getting these tips and sharing them with you. Here we go. Hank Shaw from huntgathercook.com. How you doing, Hank?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Great. Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. I always love the conversations when we talk about food, outdoor cooking. We've done a number of these episodes over the years, and I think the cool thing about you is you're well known in the industry, not only kind of, not just fish, but big game, hunting, gathering. And we're going to send everybody out to huntgathercook.com for those that want to check in more with what you have going. But I want to talk about some tips on cooking. I think that's a struggle for me. I think that's a struggle for a lot of people with wild game because it's just different than cooking other types of stuff you might buy at the store. But before we get into that, let's take it back to your outdoor, maybe fishing. Talk about that. Do you have a first memory of fishing and kind of how you got into it?
My mom is from Gloucester, Massachusetts, so we come by fishing honestly. And there isn't a time I've been alive that I haven't been in and around fish and seafood. I mean, there are pictures of me as a 2-year-old, eating clams on the half shell, and I can't even remember the first time I caught a flounder. It was probably when I was 3. And so fishing is really part of my DNA, and it's something that I've been doing my whole life.
How did you, we recently did an episode, obviously we focus a lot on fly fishing here, but we did an episode it was on the East Coast, and the guest was talking about catching flounder on a fly and things like that. How did you, when you originally got into it, how were you catching flounder as a kid?
I mean, it's the same way I catch them now. I mean, if it's winter flounder, you're going to put a piece of corn on a hook as a bead or a yellow bead because they are attracted to the color yellow because they chew on mussels. And the particular kind of mussels that winter flounder their flesh is bright yellow. So that's a good attractant. And then, you either use a piece of, mussel itself if you can find them or something like that. And with fluke, you can use artificials, but it's much easier to catch them and much better, in my opinion, because, I don't, full disclosure, I don't really fly fish and I don't really catch and release. I mean, obviously, obviously for legal reasons, I catch and release, but I don't go fishing to catch and release. So, sorry, everybody who doesn't eat their fish.
No. And actually, I think, I think that is a little bit of a misnomer on fly fish. I think, part of it is that, fly fishing, there is a conservation ethic, and catch and release is in some places, in your area, right? I mean, Atlantic salmon are not doing well. There's lots of populations that are struggling, but I think a lot of us agree that, if the populations are healthy enough to eat a fish, that makes sense. I mean, we all love fish. I think you're preaching to the choir. That's why we're here today. We want to hear some good recipes.
Okay. And I also use a lot of bait too, because there's certain, fish that are just, virtually impossible to catch if you don't use bait. So anyway, yeah, I mean, it's pretty much bait fishing for fluke and flounder, and that's the general program. I mean, a spinning glow actually works really quite well, but a spinning glow with a piece of spearing on it is money for fluke.
Okay. And what would be, I'm just interested in this because we always have this conversation. Fly fishing's come a long ways from just a trout thing back in the day to now people are catching, mako sharks on a fly and stuff like that. What is that fish that you think maybe isn't able, you need bait to catch it on?
There are a bunch of fish on the bottom. If you're fishing 200 or 300 feet down, it's a lot of the pelagics you can catch on a fly, and really anything that you can get a fly to and you can present properly, you can catch with a fly. But I can tell you, I've caught any number of permits, and apparently catching a permit on the fly is like the holy grail, but it sure is easier to catch them on a piece of shrimp.
Right. That's right. They're smart. That's cool. So this is a great story. I think that, like I said, I want to get into some tips on helping people cook because, like me and most of us out here love eating fish. And so that's part of the game plan today. But let's talk about how you became this, essentially a famous person in the cooking field. Like when did it come from, getting fishing, hunting with your family, your mom, to where you've got this full-time thing in the cooking space?
Well, I was a restaurant cook for the beginning part of my working life. And so I did that for a few years while I was in college and graduate school. And then I kind of switched over to becoming a journalist, and I was a journalist for a long time. I ended up covering politics quite a lot, everything from local politics all the way up to the presidency. I covered 2 presidential campaigns and Congress and a bunch of governors and that sort of thing. And so fishing during that time was always been kind of a release or kind of a, fish don't lie to you, in other words. So
Yeah.
it was a good way to kind of recharge in between work sessions. That kind of ended in 2008, 2010, and I went back to the kitchen, and I started Hunter Angler Gardener Cook even before that in 2007. So I did that because I don't know if you've noticed or anything, but politics has gotten a little bit contentious,
crazy, yeah,
and it didn't used to be that bad, not at all. It's been so bad for so long. There's a lot of people who don't know anything else, but it used to not be bad. And as it got worse and worse, I needed to, a way out. It was just soul crushing. So food was the way to do it. And so I started to write magazine articles about fish and seafood and about other things as well. And what happened was I very quickly realized that I had too many ideas and not enough outlets. So I started the blog in 2007. And since then, I mean, it's been kind of, the rest is history, kind of. I got my first James Beard nomination in 2009, and I got another nomination in 2010, and then I ended up winning the award in 2013. And if you're not familiar, the James Beards are something like the Oscars of the food world. They're kind of a big deal.
Wow.
And so I've been doing this with Hunter Angler Gardener Cook full time since 2010, and I've written 5 cookbooks, and I'm working on a 6th. And that's just kind of been the way I've been able to make my way in the world over the last, 14 years.
That is so cool. Yeah, that's an amazing story. And your books, I mean, the books you have, the titles are amazing. I think you've got a few different ones, right? But Buck Moose. What was your first one that you had out there?
It was called Hunt, Gather, Cook. And it was there was a lot of blog to book things back in that era, and this is one of them, where this was a book based on the website. And it's an interesting snapshot because I've been desperate to be able to redo it because it came out in 2011, and I know so much more than I did in 2010 when I wrote it that I wish I could redo it, but I don't own that book the way I do my later books, so I can't just say, hey, I'm going to do a revised version. But that book has a little bit of everything. And then after that, I did a duck and goose cookbook. So I'm a pretty big duck and goose hunter. And that one came out in 2013. And then Buck Moose, that's the first book that I own. And I did that one in 2016. And then Pheasant, Quail, Cottontail came out in 2018. And then Hook, Line, and Supper, which is the book that would be most close to everyone's hearts here, That one came out in 2021.
Yeah, 2021. That's right. And maybe we could start there with the hook, line, and supper, because I think obviously, it's got to focus on fish and things like that. But where does somebody that hasn't checked that book out, maybe walk us through the premise of that, maybe a couple of tips on, because we catch a lot of fish, it could be trout, it could be bass, it could be, saltwater fish, whatever. What does that book cover? Does it cover a little bit of everything?
It does. It covers both freshwater and salt, and it covers both fish and seafood. And the goal of the book, because I've read, I don't know how many dozens and dozens and dozens of fish cookbooks, very few fish cookbooks really get into base technique. And the reason why it's important is because, yeah, there are differences from fish to fish. I'm not going to say no to that, but for the most part, fish and seafood is interchangeable. So I would see cookbooks with things like, this is a cutthroat trout recipe.
Right.
I'm like, bro.
Right.
Like, there's zero reason why you can't use any other trout or a char or a salmon of any kind. And for that matter, depending on what that recipe is, there's probably 25 other species of fish and sometimes seafood that you could also plug into that particular recipe, and it works just fine. So that's kind of what I set out to do, was to create systems. And this is how you fry fish. Like there's a whole chapter on frying fish, because everybody in the world fries fish in a different way. And if it's done correctly, there's all kinds of really amazing, effects that you can get depending on the batter and the heat and blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't necessarily matter that this recipe says trout, because unless I tell you otherwise, you can pretty much plug and play. And that's what makes this book different. So that rather than page to the index, like, oh, well, I caught a cobia, I'm looking for a cobia recipe. No, find a recipe for a big, steaky, meaty fish and then use that.
Right. I love that. No, this is awesome. So maybe just start there on that. Let's just talk. Some of this is going to be higher level, stuff, but on the fish, like frying fish, I mean, that is something that I think everybody should know how to do. Could you give us a couple of tips there on if somebody let's just stay with the trout. Somebody's got a trout or a salmon or something like that. What are the tips? What are you covering in that are general?
I think the first one is don't fry trout or salmon.
There you go.
I mean, yeah. So fatty fish and soft fish tend to not be great as fried fish. And that gets people in trouble. So yes, I've had fried trout, and yes, I've had fried salmon. In general, they're okay. So the semantic difference is that if you flour and saute, say, trout, it's actually quite good. But what I'm talking about is like a piece of fried fish. So generally speaking, whitefish are what you want to fry because they tend to be leaner and firmer. And the number one tip I can tell you is don't be scared of the heat of the oil. And this is what gets people in trouble a lot is, you're scared. You have a thing of 350, 360 degree oil on your stove, and that frightens some people. And the problem is if you don't have your oil that hot, you're going to have greasy food. If your oil is hot enough, your fried thing is not going to be greasy because you have this kind of physical push-pull of the process where the hot oil sets the batter or the coating, and then it immediately starts to heat up the center, which is the fish. And so the center starts to exude steam as it cooks. And, that steam will push out while the oil is trying to get in. And so what you see are the bubbles of things frying, around the thing that's frying. And so you watch those bubbles. And as soon as those bubbles start to recede and start to slow down quite a lot, that's when you know that most of the moisture inside the thing has been cooked out. And so that anything that you do to fry it after that is going to be oil getting in. So that there's a visual cue of proper frying of, it's going to have a rush of bubbles, and then those bubbles are going to die down, and that's when you take the thing out. Because if you don't pay attention, that's how you get soggy fried fish. Low oil temperature gets you soggy fish, and all of this makes people hate fried fish.
Right. Love this. No, this is an amazing tip. I love this for a start. So that really isn't, cooking isn't a time thing necessarily. It's more it sounds like you're not looking at your watch on how long to put the thing on there.
Almost never, because people who want precision like that, I'm sorry, I don't know how thick your fish is. I don't know how hot your burner is. I don't know how cold the fish is. So there's so many variables that can affect time that, I mean, I like to joke that I use the force, and it's true because I've just been doing this for so many years, but you have to use other senses than a clock.
Yeah, gotcha. How long, so if somebody's listening now and they feel like they're a terrible wild game cook or just cook in general, how long would it take them to get to some skills where they maybe not at your level using the force, but they feel good they're doing this? Could they read one of your books and really start to implement some stuff and become a good cook?
Absolutely, because I write these books specifically to distill kind of what I know. And in fact, a lot of times there will be people who, when I write these books, there'll be someone like, okay, why did you just do that? And so I'll step out of myself and say, oh, well, because the sound of the sizzle changed. And so that I'll include that in the instructions in my recipes. And so my recipes are not just sort of cook at a high oven until done, that kind of crap.
Yeah.
No, I give you very specific cues. I also give you lots of substitutions because not everybody can get, esoteric ingredients for any given dish. So I'll often give you alternatives. The third thing that makes my stuff a little different, and it's really sad to say that this makes it different, but my recipes are all tested by normal humans. And that's increasingly rare with cookbooks. In fact, it's really scandalously rare in cookbooks. But think about this. You went up north, you caught some grayling, and you brought some grayling back, and you really want to do them justice to your family or your friends. If I give you a recipe for cooking grayling and it doesn't work, you can't go to the store and get more grayling. Like, there are so many things that I write about where that thing is precious. Maybe it's an elk tenderloin or some rare fish or seafood that doesn't appear in stores. And if I tell you to do something and that something doesn't work, not only have I ruined that meal, you don't really easily have a way to replace it, to do it again. So it's got to be tight.
Yeah, that's a great point. You have, you name the trophy or the treasure, you've got this thing, you got a one-time shot at it. And so you don't want to mess it up. So we talked about it. I think we start off with a great first tip on the oil. Would you give us, maybe we could talk about a couple of tips for each, and we'll get into maybe some big game as well. But what would be another thing on cooking? Let's just stick with that trout. If you're cooking it, sounds like you're breading it. But what other tip would you give somebody on that?
If I'm talking trout, typically I'm going to cook trout with smoke and fire. And because trout tend to be fairly fatty, I mean, I know stockers are not terribly fatty, but a good serious wild trout is going to be pretty fatty and it's going to be relatively soft. So smoke and fire are kind of your friends there. And that can be smoking. That could be kind of what I call smoke roasting, which would be like, barbecue, really. Like a barbecue trout is actually quite good, where the grill or the smoke is covered in it, but it's still like 225 or 250 or even 300 degrees. And then grilling itself is actually wonderful for trout. Like everybody, I mean, I don't know if everybody here listening to this has had, trout grilled over an open fire in the woods, but if you haven't, you need to put that on your bucket list.
Yeah. And how would you, let's just say we're out there in the woods, we've got a cooking grate or whatever. Is that, talk about that. How would you cook that over the fire in a perfect situation?
Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you to do is make sure that grate is clean. The grate needs to be clean, the grate needs to be hot, and the grate needs to be oiled. If you don't do those three things, your trout's going to stick to your grate and you will be sad. That's the biggest thing people have when they're grilling any kind of fish outdoors is, the grate needs to be clean, the grate needs to be oiled, and the fish needs to be oiled. If you have all of those things, you could flip it super easy. If you don't, you can get into trouble. I think another piece would be leave it alone. People tend to want to fiddle with things on the grill, no matter what it is. Let the grill do its job. So there's a thing that'll happen, even with all the clean grate and the oil and such. If you try to move a piece of fish off a grill before it's ready, it will stick. And so when the piece of fish moves off the grill cleanly, it's pretty much been seared and done. And then you can flip it. And typically I only flip a fish once.
Skwala Fly Fishing, combining advanced materials with fishing-focused, purpose-built design. Skwala waders, jackets, shirts, pants, and insulation are made for us. To help Wet Fly Swing listeners right now, Skwala is offering a 10% discount on your next order. Just visit skwalafishing.com and use the coupon code WETFLYSWING10 at checkout. That's Skwala, Skwala, gear for us, the serious angler. Are you ready to elevate your fly fishing adventures but unsure where to start? Look no further than Guidebook, the premier platform for connecting you with the finest fly fishing guides in the country. You can make your way right now to wetflyswing.com/guidebook and start planning your next unforgettable fly fishing journey right now. How do you know when, again, back to this timing thing, but how do you know when it's ready to be flipped?
Again, it's kind of the force, but one way to do it, it will come up off, use a spatula, and then if it comes up off the grill grates pretty easily, it's ready. Another way to tell is I always make slashes in the meat of the fish when I'm grilling them. And so if you're looking at where the slash meets the backbone as the fish is cooking, this is on the side that has not yet been cooked. If that backbone, when you're looking deep inside the slash, if it's starting to turn opaque, if it's starting to bubble just a tiny bit, because the heat from the side that's facing the grill has carried through to the center of the fish, then you can flip it. But if you're looking at your slashes that you made in the fish on the uncooked side, and they still look pretty cool and uncooked, you might want to give it a little bit more time.
Gotcha. Wow, that's great. Good. Okay. Well, I think that gives us a little start. And like we said, we're going to hit high level on a lot of this, these topics today, but we mentioned we'll have links to all your books in the show notes so people can check those out. Let's move to something else that's we have a large chunk of our audience who are hunters as well. Let's talk about that. What do you think is the most common? I mean, do you cook all sorts of big game? What is your focus with the big game or kind of bigger animals?
I mean, if you can eat it, I've cooked it. I mean,
you have you, Dave. We were just talking about caribou the other day. We were talking about caribou up in Quebec, how the numbers are down. But have you done stuff like that, like caribou, moose, all that stuff?
Oh yeah.
Let's start with something that everybody kind of knows more of, kind of like the trout. It's like deer. Let's just start with deer. So you've got this deer, you've got venison, you've got this animal, this your prized thing for the year. How do you where do you start with that?
So I think the number one, and this actually applies to really all wild game. So I'll start at this high level and I'll drill down to deer in a second. The number one problem new wild game cooks have is they cook the tough parts too little and the tender parts too much. So they'll take shanks or shoulders or legs or wings and they won't cook them enough. And so they'll say, well, wild turkey legs are not edible. Well, sorry, bro, they're 100% edible, and they're actually better than the breast if you give them the time. And then conversely, they might say, well, this wild pig backstrap or this deer backstrap or this bird breast is livery or tough or whatever. And the answer to that is, well, you cooked it too much. So when it comes to backstrap or tenderloin or bird breasts, remember this: you can always cook something more. You cannot uncook it. So if you're a newbie or if you're nervous, if you're going to make a mistake with those tender cuts by cooking it too little, because then here's a trick. Okay, so you cook a backstrap, right?
Yeah.
But it's still raw inside. And you're like, ugh, God. Set it on the counter, let it rest for a little bit, make a pan sauce. Pick a pan sauce. I've got tons of them on the website. And then slice that meat and put it nap it. So basically bathe it in that pan sauce for 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and it'll finish it up. You'll be fine. And nobody will notice.
Right. That's awesome. And by finish it up, just turn on the heat and fry it for a little bit.
Yeah. Because you've made this pan sauce and the pan sauce is probably boiling at the time. And so you're just kind of it's in this restaurant speak, it's called napping.
Okay.
So you're basically coating this undercooked meat with hot sauce and that cooks it through.
Gotcha. Wow.
So with venison, I think the biggest thing is there's no fat in it. All of the fat in deer meat is on the outside of the meat. So I've seen a hint of marbling in venison exactly once in damn near 30 years.
Yep.
So virtually all of the fat on virtually all wild game animals is subcutaneous. So it's between the meat and the skin. So what that means is that if you cook a piece of the backstrap, for example, fat is insulation. So fat is insulation and fat is an insurance policy. Any talking chimp can cook an A5 Wagyu because There's so much fat in that. Even if you wildly overcook something that fatty, it'll still taste fine because you have all of this fat intermarbled within the meat that acts as kind of an insulation and an insurance policy against bad flavor. Temperature in venison, because there is no internal fat, it's only water. So what you're dealing with is a piece of meat that can go from 120 to 140 in the space of about 8 seconds. So you have to be careful. You have to pay attention. You can't, drink 3 beers and have all these venison steaks on the grill, walk away and watch the end of the football game and come back to it. You can't do that. You have to keep your eye on it, and you have to have a hotter fire, whether it is on a pan or on a grill, than you would with beef steak. So that's the thing that people fail to recognize quite a lot. A final thing is, if you want to avoid black and blue, which is to say a charred outside but a cold center, some people like that, but I don't, is you salt your meat and you let it come to room temperature before you sear it.
What does that do? Cures it up or something like that?
A couple things. It starts to season the inside because the salt will begin to work towards the center, but it won't work too far in. But what it really does is it creates a very hostile environment for bacteria while your meat is sitting at room temperature.
Oh, gotcha. Wow, these are awesome. Yeah, I think so. This is great. So going back to, we got this meat, you got this deer, you got this backstrap, or whatever it is, the tenderloin, the best part of the animal, and you want to make this thing right. So if you get you're on barbecue, just get a really hot Any tips on the barbecue? What's the best way? Because you've got all these different things. You got the fire, you got propane, you got charcoal. Like, talk about that a little bit. Should we be using charcoal, or are there better ways to do this cooking, if you're out back?
I mean, you're really trading flavor for convenience is really that's the name of the game. I mean, the best fire is always wood. Always.
Yeah.
Period. End of story. Because wood provides flavor, wood provides smoke, wood provides so much. But it's harder. You got to start a wood fire and you got to keep a wood fire going. Yeah. And then wood turns into coals, and that's great. And so, yes, an open wood fire is the pinnacle. After that would be lump charcoal.
Oh, yeah, right, more natural.
Yeah, real charcoal. And then after that would be briquettes, and after that would be propane.
Right, and that's it. Yeah, so propane is last. And obviously it's the easiest, right? It's the easiest, but it's the worst because you're just burning gas.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. But, you might consider things like making a tinfoil pan, as it were, and putting soaked wood chips in there so that they start to burn and smoke on the propane thing. They give you a little bit of that fire. But smoke and fire from wood is really what we're seeking when we do this kind of cooking.
Yeah, smoke and fire. Okay. So if you had that venison, again, let's just say it's the tenderloin or whatever you put it on there. Now, talk about that. Should we be cutting this up into certain size? I guess it depends on the animal, but let's say you had a normal.
I'm glad you asked that.
Yeah.
Because I do that differently. If you get your meat butchered, typically they're going to make you steaks. And I really just don't understand this because you end up with these little medallions that are microscopic. And it's just, this is America. We should cook big steaks. So what I do is, on a typical deer, I will take the backstrap off and I will clean it up, and then I'll cut it into lengths. So like a big deer, you can get maybe 3 on each side of the backstrap. And on a small deer, you get at least 2. And so you're basically dealing with a length of clean backstrap, maybe as long as your forearm, maybe a little bit shorter, but, somewhere between a pound and 2 pounds of meat all told. You cook that, and then you slice that into medallions to serve. And 2 things happen. One is way easier to cook these lengths of a backstrap. And then 2, when you slice the medallions, all that pretty pink meat is facing the person who's eating it, and they're to go, ooh, it's amazing. Where if you have like a regular beef steak looking thing, the top and the bottom are going to have those grill marks, and then your interior will look nice. And that's fine if you're talking about something like a bison or an elk or something with a really big steak. But if it's just a medallion, make medallions when you slice it. Cook it as a log, so to speak.
Gotcha. So cut the biggest steak as you can. So if you had a family of 4 or something like that, just cut your meat, if you can, into size. So it's one big steak, and then chop that up into once it's cooked.
Yes, that's what I would do, because it looks prettier and it's easier to cook to the proper temperature.
Yeah, gotcha. How do you know that the tender, what's the thing where you can use your fingers, you could tell how how cooked the meat is? Like, medium rare. What's the best way to cook that meat if you think about it like that?
What you're thinking about is the finger test for doneness. And yep, I use it all the time. So everybody out there, touch your thumb to your forefinger. Don't press, just touch them. Now, with your other hand, press the base of your thumb. And the thumb to forefinger, you press the base of your thumb. That is rare. That's what the meat will feel like. Now move up to your middle finger, thumb to middle finger. Now press the same spot. See how it's firmer?
Yeah, it's firmer.
That's a straight up medium. And that's about as far as you want to go.
I was going to say, because that's already pretty firm.
Yeah, but the thing about, it's to everyone's taste. I really prefer ducks medium, and I prefer venison medium rare. So that's in between the forefinger and the middle finger.
Yeah, I do too. Is there any problem? I mean, you see some people, like bloody, cut the horns off and throw it on, and it's bloody as can be. Is there any problem with that if you have that taste? You like the thing that's just, barely, I don't know what you call that, barely cooked. I guess that's rare.
Not really. I mean, it's one piece of the books that I write is that I do pretty extensive food safety research. The CDC keeps pretty good records of this sort of thing, and almost nobody gets sick from undercooked venison. Is it possible? Yes, it is. But is it rare? It's impossibly. It's vanishingly rare.
I know.
It's a handful of cases.
You could probably almost eat raw meat, right?
I have eaten it many times. And, venison tartare is one of my favorite things.
Right. Is tartare, is that where you kind of give it and mix it in something? It's just raw and you mix in some sauce or whatever?
It's finely diced raw meat with seasonings.
Yeah. What about, again, we're going to be all over the place today, but so this just got me thinking, of sushi. Is that raw? So you hear about these things like parasites or whatever is that stuff, should that always be frozen, or are you eating raw fish as well?
The single largest vector for tapeworm in the United States is trout sushi.
Oh, wow.
I urge you to never, ever, ever eat raw trout unless it's been properly frozen first.
Now, is trout, does that include salmonids? So would salmon be a trout? So
tapeworms start to show up in salmon once they're in the rivers.
Oh.
So yes, if it's 100% freshwater salmon, yeah, that counts.
And probably some places, right, if you're eating out, you never know. They could be getting this thing from anywhere.
Yeah, but it's a very rare thing for raw salmon in a commercial setting to not have been frozen first. And the problem with sea-run salmon is not tapeworm, it's anisakis worm, the seal worm. And that is a sometimes visible worm. They look like little watch springs. And they're in a lot of different kinds of fish. And if you happen to eat the larva of one, or even a full worm, which would be unusual but not impossible, and it survives, it will latch onto the inside of your stomach, and then a battle royal will ensue in which you feel like you've been food poisoning, because you sort of have been. And then you typically win this fight, and then it dies and you're all done. But you can be in for a day or two of worshiping at the porcelain altar. So yeah, I know people who have eaten raw sea-run salmon for 20 years have never gotten one. And I know a guy who on his second try got one. So yes, blast freeze anything that you're going to eat raw. And when I mean blast freeze, I'm talking your chest freezer or something that gets below zero, ideally 10 below or 20 below, even if you can do that.
Okay. So just throw it in the freezer for a certain amount of time, or how does that look?
Like a week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so you definitely want to freeze that. Okay. At least as a trout. There's other species you don't have to worry about that?
A few. So some pelagics, but not all pelagics, are pretty much parasite-free.
What is can you describe a pelagic?
Sure. So there are two kinds of fish. There's pelagics and benthics. So benthic fish live on the bottom or near the bottom, and pelagic fish live in the middle or on the top. So tuna, wahoo, mackerel, jacks.
Yeah, bluefish.
Those are all pelagics. Bluefish are pelagics, yeah. Whereas like a flounder is a benthic.
Yeah, benthic. Right. Cool. And I guess they're all, what's your favorite, again, keeping it random, what is the seafood? It sounds like you eat everything, but what's that fish? Let's just keep it with the benthic fish. Is there one you really love, or do you love all those types of bottom fish, flounder, everything?
Winter flounder.
Yeah.
Kind of comes up top. Grouper, like scamp grouper, are really, really good. Halibut's really good too.
Yeah, halibut is good.
I mean, if you're thinking about bottom dwellers, those will spring to mind. And then in terms of the pelagics, pelagics like tuna and jacks and things, they're kind of a cool set because if unless you do smoke and fire on them, they're really just better raw. Raw tuna is, in my opinion, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I like really good canned tuna too. So
yeah, this is great. Well, I think we've definitely laid out a few tips. I want to keep on this track a little bit, but I want to talk about, maybe let's go to the hunter-gatherer piece. Describe that again, because I don't want to miss anything today. Maybe start with the book and then talk about, how that fits into all this everything else we're talking about here.
Sure. So I started fishing and gathering things from a very, very young age. And so those two legs of the stool I've had with me my whole life. And I didn't start hunting until I was until I was 30. So, I started as an adult, but the whole gathering thing kind of came out of my mom thought it was very important for her children to know the names of things. And so, when you know the names of things that, it's not a tree, it's an elm. It's not, a bush, it's a yew. It's not a,
right.
To know the names of things makes them real. And if you don't know the names of things, it's just a thing and it doesn't occupy any space in your mind. So birds and animals and plants and things, once they have names, they occupy a space in your mind and then they matter. So that was part of my early education. And then very quickly, children, can you eat it?
Right.
Sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. So
yeah.
I very quickly learned a whole bunch of edible things, and plus, picking blueberries or sea beans or beach peas or blackberries or things like that. Those are all things that kind of my family did as a kid. And I think the knowledge of edible wild plants and mushrooms really fleshes out the experience of a hunter and angler, if only because I can't tell you how many times that I have been out hunting or out fishing and have gotten skunked. But there's a whole bunch of edible things around here that I can come home with something, and then that becomes your meal.
Right. That is perfect. Yeah. And on that, so your book covers, maybe take a dive into that a little bit. Does it cover describe, what the thesis is of the book and what you cover there?
So Hunt, Gather, Cook, it's not so much a guidebook as it is a primer on all things wild. It has fishing, foraging, and hunting in it. And it's primarily geared towards getting you into those fields wholeheartedly. It's kind of more inspirational. It has lots of useful information and
Sure.
recipes as well. But it's primarily, if you're a hunter, but you don't know gathering, this is going to give you the tools to get started to do that. And if you're a gatherer, but you've never hunted, it's going to give you the tools to get started with that. And it was a book still in print. I'm kind of surprised. It's 13 years in print, which
Wow.
is I'm very proud of. But it's basically a jumping off book.
Yeah. So it's just like a starting point. So, and obviously people here are coming for fishing a lot, but they're, like I said, they're into hunting. I think maybe I'm just guessing myself. This is the way I am. I'm not as much of a gatherer, although I love it. I love that. I would love to learn more. So if that was me and I'm going in, how would the gathering piece, maybe break that down a little bit? What could I be, maybe a couple tips on getting started there?
Well, I think the number one is know where you live and find a guidebook that is local to you. So the flora of the East Coast is largely the same. And I say that with an uptick because there are definitely differences.
Right. Because you're still in the East Coast now?
I'm in Minnesota.
Oh, you're in Minnesota, right? So you're kind of in a little bit
in the
middle, yeah.
The top middle.
The top middle. Yeah, that's right.
But like the Great Plains is very different. And the Intermountain West is very different. And the desert is different. And the California, the Pacific Northwest, those regions that are west of the Great Plains are very different. So you need a special book for them. If you're listening to this and you are somewhere in the Midwest or in the East, I highly recommend the books by Sam Thayer.
Okay.
Thayer. His books are some of the best foraging books, bar none. And he's got, I think, 3 or 4 of them. And those are guidebooks. And those are books that are designed to give you the knowledge you need to safely gather things. His knowledge is great. It breaks down a little bit once you get from the Great Plains to the West, only because he's from Wisconsin. I mean, he knows about them, but his writings are best from about the Great Plains east. So if you're there, definitely Sam Thayer. In terms of the other books, there's no one as good as Sam in the other places, I've thought about writing one for the West, but I haven't. A guidebook is really important. If you can find people who to classes, it's far better to learn from a human being than it is from a book.
Step into the world where the river whispers and the fishing is nothing short of legendary. This year, I ventured into the heart of eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton territory where the fish were larger than life and the waters held the secrets of the best fly fishing out west. Yellowstone Teton territory is not just a location, it's a gateway to adventures that will etch themselves into your memory. With crystal clear rivers like the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake, and enough lakes to keep you going all year long, make your way to Yellowstone Teton territory and embark on a journey to one of North America's finest fly fishing destinations. Whether you're planning your trip now or just dreaming it up, the YTT is where those dreams turn into reality. Remember, Yellowstone Teton territory. That's Teton, Teton. It's time to experience Eastern Idaho for yourself and support this podcast at the same time. Maybe we can give a shout out to your class just so we don't miss that. You have kind of an online course, right, on cooking. Is that still out there?
I do. I have one and a half, so to speak. So I have one on venison. It's a group called Outdoor Class. And if you just Google Hank Shaw and Outdoor Class, you'll find it. And that one's on venison. That one you can get right now. It's a little bit set up like the master class program where you pay to access the whole site. So you might come for me, but you get all kinds of different classes with the access.
Love that.
Beyond that, there is a fishing one. We've already shot it. It's ready to go. And there's a fishing class that I think is going to drop any day now, really.
Oh, really? Okay. So, and this probably will come out a little bit later, so maybe it'll even be out. Where could they go to find the fishing?
Same place. So it's Outdoor Class, and just if you link my name with that, you will find it. My best guess is it'll probably come out in June.
Awesome. Well, this is great. Well, I think this is pretty cool. I love that you mentioned Wisconsin with Sam Thayer because we're actually I'm
Go Badgers.
Well, yeah, go Badgers. I'm actually physically in Oregon, but we're going to be traveling. We do these trips for the podcast all around the country, and we're doing a giveaway event. Actually, we're in the middle of one right now, but we're doing one heading to Wisconsin to the Driftless area. But we're doing a road trip. I'm taking the family across, and so this is going to be fun. But it sounds like maybe Sam's book is one I should pick up, and then as we're going,
very much so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so maybe talk about that. So if we start out, let's just take our trip. So we're starting in Oregon. We're probably going to go across Montana, through the Dakotas. So I'm going to get Sam's book. As we're going, what other resources might we have to kind of think about gathering as we're maybe going to be hiking and exploring that area out there?
Me up in Montana in the Intermountain West?
Yeah, some of that area. Or you said there isn't anything like Sam, but it would be like a I'm trying to think of the name. What are the books you see out there? A lot of these types. Are there a common, general books that cover this?
I think there's a Rocky Mountain book by a guy named Harrington that's quite good.
Okay.
And there's a couple of Great Plains books. So the thing about that is, as you get used to it, and as you do this for more and more time, you understand plant families. So until you understand plant families, you're going to have to go plant by plant. So another book that is very useful for getting this kind of systemic knowledge is a book called Botany in a Day. And Botany in a Day is like, here's basic plant knowledge quickly.
Right. Yeah, because botany is not an easy subject for some people, right?
No, no, but it's really useful to be able to speak the language and so that everybody's talking about the same things. And it also, for example, there's something on the order of, 10 or 20,000 species in the celery family, the carrot and celery family, the Apiaceae. And they range from hemlock, which will kill you dead, to some of the most delicious edibles in the country. So you kind of have to know your stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Hemlock versus, OSHA or lovage or wild parsnip or something like that. It can be anything from like, oh, delicious to, oh, I died.
Right. Well, I was just listening to another podcast. I can't remember the guy's name, but he's talking about mushrooms. And I think was his number one tip on mushrooms. Do not eat anything until you for sure verified it multiple times. Is that 100%. Pretty much always the case? Yeah, you don't want to be just kind of, it looks kind of close and all that. That'd probably be a good tip.
Yeah, there's a thing that human beings do. Humans are exceptionally good at creating patterns out of things. Like we're good at pattern recognition. But there's a problem that we have where we can deceive ourselves into thinking that what we're looking at is what we want. This happens in relationships too, where you think you see a pattern that creates the favorable outcome, whether it's in a relationship or in the mushroom that you're looking at. So you think your mind is tricking you into thinking that it actually is this mushroom.
Right.
But if you stop and you look at it coldly, is it though? And until you can sort of stop and step outside the emotional rush of finding something that you really thought was special and interesting and delicious, and look at it coldly, and in mushroom hunting, there's a thing called a key, so you can key out a species of mushroom. So you're holding this mushroom and you look at the key, and it's a series of if-then statements. So does it have a red cap? Go to 6. Okay. So if it has a red cap and striations on the stem, go to 7. If it doesn't have striations, go to 9. That sort of thing. And you have to be clinical in your identification of things until you have them internalized. Once you have them internalized, like, look, I've spotted edible wild things at 60 miles an hour down the highway because you get, like I said, human beings are exceptionally good at pattern recognition. And sometimes all it is the fact that the color green of this particular plant is different from the green that is everything else. So even whizzing by, like, oh, that's a whatever.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, that's awesome. Well, let's stay back on the foraging. So maybe give us a tip or two on, so we're out there traveling around. What are some things other than getting the right guidebooks while you're out there? Any other tips you would tell somebody to find some plants, or whatever that is?
When are you going?
So we're going to be going in September, mid to late September.
Okay. It's a little bit after berries, but I'll give you a berry tip.
Okay.
So a berry tip is anything that looks like a blackberry, in that compound fruit form. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. What do you mean by you mean like there's multiple fruits in the one fruit?
Yeah, like a blackberry or a raspberry, that structure.
Yeah.
Anything that is edible.
Oh, wow.
So there's a zillion different kinds of blackberry-looking things.
That's cool.
If they look like a blackberry, they're edible. Now, don't be like my sisters and tell your little kids to eat the red blackberries. But
yeah, right.
Because then they're just tart and gross, but they're not harmful. And on round berries, anything that has the blueberry mark is edible. So the blueberry mark. So what I want you to do is go find a blueberry, which is easy. Find a blueberry and look at that star mark on the other side of the berry. So there's the side that the stem used to be on, the side that the flower used to be on will leave a mark that's shaped basically like a star. And any berry that has that star pattern on the bottom of it is in the Vaccinium clan, and they're all edible. Now, there's lots of red berries that don't have that mark, or blueberries that don't have that mark. They may or may not be edible, but with that very particular Vaccinium star mark on the other side, like the easiest way to do it is just look at the bottom of a blueberry. Memorize that, and you're good.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's definitely poisonous things out there, mushrooms, berries, all that. But it feels like I always go back to the bear, even alligator. We were doing a podcast about fishing in areas where there were some alligators. And, I think it's all the same with animals. Give them space. You're probably not. Most people aren't dying. 1 in a million, right? People dying from what? Is it berry? Is the food? Are people dying from eating the wrong foods, these wild edibles?
I think the most common are mushroom poisonings. They're still not common, but that's probably the most common because two things can happen. One, you either get foreign populations, like in California, the Southeast Asian population is used to a particular mushroom called the paddy straw mushroom. And a destroying angel amanita looks a lot like it. So if you're not super careful, you can get poisoned by that, and that happens once or twice a year. And another thing that happens is you'll find lazy people. So, and it could be very good mushroom hunters, but you picked, 50 mushrooms, right?
Yep.
And you don't really look at them a second time when you're in there in your basket and you're ready to go. Somehow an amanita got in there, or somehow some deadly mushroom got in there,
right?
Because you had a brain fart in the field and you didn't double check your mushrooms when you came time to cook them. That happens with depressing frequency.
Jeez.
And then finally, they're just mushrooms are biologically active in a way that plants just aren't. So they're actually closer to human beings than plants are. The most recent common ancestor to mushrooms and animals is closer than it is to animals and plants. So there's this crazy biologically active thing that goes on with mushrooms where 1,000 people can find them delicious and then one person gets super sick off them. And the individual reactions with mushrooms are much more common than individual reactions with anything else.
Wow. Yeah. The mushrooms are really interesting. I don't know much about them, but I know there's lots of people have written about them, and those connections to the humans are really interesting, right? And there's the whole mitochondrial, that whole thing going. Do you know a lot about that? Do you have any books that you would recommend? I know we've talked about them on the podcast. There's some pretty big name people like yourself out there talking about it, but it seems overwhelming with the amount of knowledge. Would you guide us anywhere on that?
I think the book I would recommend would be anything by Paul Stamets.
Yeah,
Stamets. He's kind of really well known for that. And I think Michael Pollan wrote a book that involves mushrooms as well.
Okay, good. Well, this has been awesome, Hank. I think we're going to take it out of here. We got a segment called, this is our local fly shop shout out segment. And what we're focusing on here typically is local shops in the fly fishing space. There's a lot of these, kind of the backbone of the fly fishing industry. And we have one that's a partner with us, Waters West Fly Shop. They're up in kind of the OP Washington area. So we're going to give them a shout out. They're doing some good stuff there, I'm sure. And I know Ed and the crew and Kyle, they love catching the saltwater fish right off of the sound out in Puget Sound. Let's talk about that. Let's just start there. What would be, so let's say they catch a surf perch or something like that. Let's talk about that for these guys. How would they cook that fish? Let's start there real quick.
Surf perch are dicey. That's a hard one because the surf perch meat gets very mushy. So I have cooked them 6 ways to Sunday.
Oh, good. So but you got to know, this is great. I'm hoping to see, we're not going to stump you, right?
Oh, well, you might, but I mean, not with surf perch. But I've cooked them 6 ways to Sunday, and there's a bunch of different species. There's a few that'll hold up to, I like to scale them and then slash them and then deep fry them Chinese style. Oh. And that's actually quite good. Like really deep fry, like really put the spurs to it, so that the bones get soft.
Oh, wow. So yeah, the deep fry is awesome. And is there one good way you could just give a tip on that, on how to do that?
I mean, just get a bunch of vegetable oil and a wok. And you do one fish at a time, and then you slash the fish after it's scaled, and then dust it in cornstarch, and then deep fry it there, and then serve it with a spicy sauce.
Nice. Okay. So there you go.
But most surf perch are mushy, right? So in that case, I'm going to tell you to get skinless fillets and make fish cakes out of them. And they make excellent fish cakes. Oh,
yeah. And fry them.
You could bake them too, but yeah, I fry fish cakes mostly.
Yeah, I feel like the deep fry is the ultimate. I go back to the, sturgeon. Right. I've eaten some deep fried or whatever the fish is. It seems like deep fried is one of my favorites. But is there health in this? Is there anything we should be thinking about on being healthy when we're doing all this cooking?
Nah, you're fine. I mean, assuming, because here's the thing. I mean, unless you're eating deep fried fish on every day, it's still kind of a special thing. Yeah. And if you have your oil hot enough, you'll be all right. The trick is that people get freaked out. Also, the other thing that people get freaked out is if you're deep frying, you're using a lot of oil. You can reuse that oil maybe 3 or 4 times, put it, strain it, put it back into its container and mark it as fish oil, because you don't want to put your fish oil when you're cooking pancakes. But yeah, you could save money that way by saving your oil 2 or 3 times and then reusing it. At some point, it'll just get too fishy and then you throw it out.
Yeah, gotcha. All right. Well, and a couple more here on, just on that local piece. We mentioned about the local fly shops. That's a great place to find your local fly shop, get your stuff. Word about people that are here, maybe they're not getting their fit, maybe they're not killing fish or getting wild game. Where do you recommend, again, this is different around maybe take it to your area. Are there places you recommend that you can get some of this good wild game around the country, or there's shops, local places like that?
Well, you can't really buy wild game. That's been illegal for over a century in the United States. You can get farmed game in some places, but probably my recommendation, since this is primarily a fishing show, is to go to a really good fish market. There are tons in the Pacific Northwest, well beyond pike. Pike is fine, but there's a lot of better local ones. Here in the Twin Cities, there's a place called Brookies that's really quite amazing. They do an excellent job, and most large places have at least one fish market that is pretty special. And another hot tip would be to go to your Asian markets.
Yeah.
Asian markets can have some unbelievably high quality fish.
Nice.
However, it can be sitting right next to a fish that should have been thrown out a week ago.
Right.
So you have to know what good fish looks like.
Yeah. Gosh. And this is more than just the smell? Smell is one. How would you know if the fish is bad or not?
They should look like they just came out of the water. So bright eyes. Bright eyes is a real key one. If the eyes are not sunken, they're not clouded. If the eyes are bright and the gills are either a pleasing pink, which means the fish has been bled, or if they're a pleasing red, which means they haven't been bled, but they're still fresh. They turn kind of a gross brownish red if they're old.
Okay. And is that the same? What if it's just a slice of meat? Could you tell just from looking at the meat?
It's harder with the fillet. There's a press test, but most fish markets are not going to let you press it.
Oh, no.
So like you stick your finger in the meat, and then if it bounces back, you're good. If it stays there, it's kind of old.
Okay. Nice. Well, let's do I got a couple of rapid fire rounds, and we'll take it out of here. So, what do you think is, for people listening, the hardest thing about cooking, wild game or fish correctly and making it great? What's the biggest struggle or the biggest thing you see people screwing up?
I think it's fish sticking. So many times, if you're going to try and sear a fish or grill a fish, it's that sticking problem. So we've already talked about what to do on the grill. On a pan, so if you have a piece of fish that you're going to sear in a pan, the pan has to be hot, the oil has to be hot. So use a very high smoke point oil, like canola or rice bran or avocado or something that has a really high smoke point. That also has to be hot. The fish must be dry. Pat it dry with a paper towel, and it has to be dry. And so when you lay it down in the pan, this is this key point. When you lay it down in the pan, the instant you lay it in the pan, jiggle the pan. So fish goes down in the pan, jiggle, and you watch the fish slide a little bit, then you can let it go. If you let it set it down and you don't do that, it will cement itself to the pan. And eventually it will come up. It will. But in some cases, your fish is going to be overdone by the time that crust forms. So that little jiggle is super key.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow, these are great. And what about on an ingredient? Let's take it to the gathering. If you're cooking, let's just stick with the fish. Is there one ingredient that you love to add that's maybe something you're gathering out there that would be perfect with the fish?
I mean, you can't beat wild fennel. Like, wild fennel is just really difficult to beat. Now, to be fair, there's really a West Coast deal.
Oh, okay.
It grows everywhere in the West Coast. But the other one that is a little bit more universal is, believe it or not, I really like mushrooms with fish. I like morels and trout are perfect together. Button mushrooms and some whitefish, because they provide a kind of a bass note. Fish tends to be, with food or music, fish tends to be like a tenor or even an alto. So a little higher in the register, a little lighter, a little brighter. So by adding something like as simple as just sauteed mushrooms, you add a bass note that can go underneath and complete the song, as it were.
That's perfect. I love that analogy. You mentioned, well, you didn't mention it, but I was reading, I think, about somewhere early in your life, the salmon boat, right? So having some influence. Was that something you...
I mean, I did it last year.
Oh, you did? So not early. So yeah. So you're still up.
Yeah.
Is this kind of an Alaska thing, or is this just something out, around the country, fishing for whatever, Atlantic salmon or anything like that?
I've never fished for Atlantic salmon, but I have fished commercially off and on since I was a late teen.
Oh, nice.
So it's one of those things where it's very difficult. The money's not fantastic, but you kind of do it because you love it. And yeah, most recently, gill netting salmon in the southeast, like the Juneau area, it's been pretty amazing.
So you go up there, and this is interesting because I had a friend. Well, I always go back to this. He's actually passed away now, but he was a commercial fisherman, did king crab up there, but I always remember him and the people around him were always rough around the edges. Like he literally got in a fight with one of his crew mates and hit him with the pan. I mean, it seemed like it was this I'm guessing you're not at that level, but do you find that when you're out there commercial that some of the folks you're around, people have, it's maybe this extreme type of life?
Crabbers, you're different.
Why is that? Why are crabbers different?
Well, I mean, just watch the show. I mean, it's, you can die.
Yeah, right.
It's, And that's not a joke. I mean, people
Yeah.
die all the time in that fishery. But what's more important is it's not if you're going to get injured, it's when you get injured. It's extremely dangerous. And the money is good. The work is hard. The conditions are harder. And so you have to have a pair of cojones to do that job. And salmon fishing is way, way nicer.
Oh, it is. So you're not battling the Bering Sea with -50 below sort of stuff.
No. Salmon fishing is a summer fishery, and if the weather is too ferocious, we don't fish because you can't really run a net in weather that's too terrible. I mean, yeah, we'll fish in bad weather, but just we won't fish in holy crap weather, you know?
Yeah, gotcha. Have you seen any changes? And I know Chinook, this is kind of one of the scary things that you hear about, it's Alaska, because you always think of like, well, Alaska's this place that will never run out of fish, but you're hearing about closures for Chinook salmon in areas that people used to fish. Are you guys seeing that out there too, where you're not able to catch or fish for the same species?
Definitely with kings. There's something going on with the kings, and so those closures are to help the fishery. But sockeyes are as good as they've ever been. Same with pinks and chums. So those three are doing really well. Silvers, I think, are fine. We haven't seen any closures on them at all. The kings seem to be the ones that are taking it in the shorts. And I don't fully know why. They're not really a huge part of our fishery. So the southeast fishery is primarily sockeyes. That's the money fish. And then in the end of this season, it's coho. And then there's a big blast of chums in June.
Oh, yeah, and chum too. Right. So chum, I love chum because you see in the stores all the time. I always think of chum.
Keda.
Right, Keda. Yeah, it's Keda. It's kind of been a marketing thing, right? But chum are the species that really turn quick, especially in, once they hit freshwater because they're spawning lower and the meat, I think, is subpar for sure then. But is chum equal to sockeye, equal to anything if you're catching it in the ocean?
Equals a different term. So I love, we call them silver brights. I love silver bright chum salmon. I really do. They're big. They can be fatty, but they tend to be much leaner than the other Pacific salmon. And they're plenty firm when you catch them in saltwater. I like them a lot. They're different. To me, they feel more like a giant trout than a salmon. They're milder in flavor and they're a little leaner. So the eating experience with a silver bright chum or a keda is much more trout-like. It's almost like catching one of those mega Lahontan cutthroats, like in Pyramid Lake, those 10, 15-pound cutthroats. It's very similar to that.
There you go. So that's it. Well, I got one more hink, and it's funny because we joke in the fly fishing and really spaces. If you're on a trip, don't talk about politics or religion, right? If you're on a guide trip, that's one thing, you just kind of don't do. But I want to do it here because you obviously have a background in politics. I'm interested in this because I think that, like we said, it seems like we're in this crazy world now with social media and all the whole thing of working together just seems like, isn't there anymore. But talk about that a little bit with where you were at. You enjoyed it for a while. What was fun about politics? It sounds like, working on presidential campaign or, periods and stuff. What did you love most about those times?
I think when I started and what got me interested in it was when I first got into it, politics was all about compromise and debate. So there would be something like the Farm Bill or a transportation bill or some major piece of legislation. And what was really fascinating about it was a legislature, whether it's in the state or in Congress, is where every aspect of a state meets in one room. So there's rural and urban, there's east and west, there's north and south, there's different races, there's different political persuasions. And all of those people have always been around. And so what you used to have was everyone who would get in a room and hash things out. And what was really interesting as a journalist was how that was going to happen. Like, what was the deal going to be made and who was going to give this up for that and that sort of thing. And that debate and that discussion and those conversations really cut the hard edges off ideology, because if your job is to get something done, to actually do something, well, you're never going to get all you want. A good example is this. So Bob Dole, he was presidential candidate in the 90s, but he was a brilliant senator from Kansas. Brilliant. I actually had long conversations with Bob Dole. Nice. Bob Dole, before he died, of course, said that basically his job was to make Democrat bills suck less. So
Right.
the idea is, so Bob would walk in with a Democrat, bill and cut the rough edges off it the way he saw it. So he wouldn't get all he wanted, but he'd get something. And then when he was majority, the Democrats' job was to make Republican bills suck less. And so that they would cut the rough edges off of that bill. And, the resulting compromise would be a bit more Democrat or a bit more Republican, depending on who ran the chamber. But it wouldn't be a total loss for the other side. And that's kind of gone away. And I think that hurts us as a republic.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it seems like that is the way it should work. I think that, the founding fathers, I think they've tried, that was what the goal was, to find compromise. And so you think you saw the change, and you think, why did that change happen? Obviously it's happened, but was it social media? What got the change? What happened to Bob Dole and others like him that stuff isn't happening as much now?
I don't want to get into it because it's a really long conversation, but the short version is people stopped talking to each other and they started talking at each other.
Oh, right. The old saying, I think back in, we were just in Virginia, not 2 hours from Capitol Hill and all that stuff. But, I think the conversation of just sitting down and, having lunch, having breakfast, hanging out with the other people, Republicans, Democrats, right, and talking, I think that's gone away. I think there's been a lot of changes, but I don't think that happens as much. And then you add social media and all this other stuff and craziness.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you took us down to politics. I appreciate that, because I think that, I actually stay out of politics for the most part. I mean, I obviously vote.
I try to also.
Yeah, but it's a really tough thing. So cool, Hank. Well, I'm going to let you get out of here. This has been amazing. I think this episode probably is going to be, definitely one of our best ever on these subjects. We'll put links to everything to your, the show notes to your books, and then give us a heads up. It's huntgathercook.com is the best place to find you on Instagram or your website.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm Hunt Gather Cook on IG, and then huntgathercook.com will take you to my website. And then To the Bone is the Substack that I run.
Oh, yeah. And Substack. And remind us again, that's the To the Bone. So just go to the bone on .substack.com.
Yeah, I think that's the exact. But if you just, Hank Shaw Substack, you'll find it.
Okay. Awesome, Hank. Well, thanks again. And I hope to keep in touch with you. We'll definitely I'll check him back after I try some of your recipes and all that stuff a little more. So thanks again, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate it.
Woo-wee. It's time to level up our cooking skills. We're going to do this together. Call to action today. Check in with Hank and let him know you heard him on this podcast, and grab one of his books. We're going to have some links in the show notes to the books we talked about, so you can have easy access to those. Before we jump out of here, I want to give a quick shout out to our new program we have going. This is an update. It's called The Shop, Wet Fly Swing Pro. You can go to wetflyswing.com/pro to learn more. We're just in the process of slowly trickling this out. So if you want to learn more, you can send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, and put The Shop in the subject line, and I'll follow up with you. We're going to be launching this to a small group of people who are interested in joining this group and making a connection. And I think this is a good example. We might have someone like Hank Shaw coming in to maybe teach some lessons in there. But it's going to be a way for all of us to connect and build that greatest trip of the year, get some discounts, get some resources and tools to level up from. Basically, we're taking this podcast to the next level. We're going to always be doing this podcast, but we're trying to find a way to level up for those that want to take it further, go deeper into the rabbit hole. Wet Fly Swing Pro, The Shop, is where you can go. Check it out right now. All right. I got to take a deep breath on that one. Let it out. Let it out. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to move on to the next thing. I hope you are having a great morning. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening wherever you are in the world. And I appreciate you for sticking in till the end and checking in with us here. Looking forward to that next episode. We'll talk to you then.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.